Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to the 7th day of 2 weeks of Thomas Hardy. Today I'm going to be talking about The Trumpet Major. Chapter 1. What was seen from the window overlooking the down. In the days of high-waisted muslin-gowned women, when the vast amount of soldiering going on in the country was a cause for much trembling to the sex, there lived in a village near the Wessex coast 2 ladies of good report, though unfortunately of limited means. Now, The Trumpet Major was published in 1880, and it is my 8th favourite Thomas Hardy novel. I know that may not sound that high up in my Hardy estimation, but I do really love this novel, and I feel like it's very underrated. I don't necessarily think that it's a Hardy novel for everyone, and in some ways it's quite different to other Hardy novels. I know that I buddy read it with Anne from Beyond the Pages, Elisa from Ex Libris, and Yamini from The Sceptical Reader, and I think I liked it a fair bit more than the other 3, but I do think it's a really great book and one that is very often overlooked. So The Trumpet Major is actually a historical novel. Although it was written in 1880, it's actually set between the years around 1804 to 1808. It's set in the first 10 years of the 19th century during the Napoleonic Wars. And this, I think, is one of the reasons why I love the book, because I love that historical backdrop. I love the interest of the Napoleonic Wars and all the drama that brings. I love the way it features the press gang and all of the historical interest that has for me. I love that this is a Hardy book set in Austen time. But to actually explain a little bit about the plot of the book, it mainly follows the character of a young woman called Anne, and as so often in Hardy novels, she has various men vying for her attention. There are in fact 3. This is another love square book, which does at times become a love pentagon. The 3 men in Anne's life include John Loveday, who is the trumpet major of the title. John is the son of Anne's next door neighbour, and they knew each other growing up, but he has now returned as a young man and as a soldier. And then there is Bob, John's brother, who Anne also knew growing up and who she was very, very fond of when they were children. Bob has been away in the Navy, and while he is perhaps not so steady as John, he is a little bit better looking and, for many people in the book, a little bit more interesting and more entertaining. Then there is Festus, who is the nephew of a local squire and who is a little bit obsessive, a little bit possessive, and really not that nice. And the book follows Anne's relationship with these 3 men, but it's also very much against the backdrop of the Napoleonic Wars, and that's something I find really, really interesting. As I've already said, one of the things I love the most about The Trumpet Major is the time period in which it's set. It's a time period which I don't know as much about as I know about the Victorians, and that always makes it more interesting to me. It's also a very, very fascinating time period because although the Napoleonic Wars didn't actually come to the coast of Britain, people in Britain at the time, especially people who, like the families in The Trumpet Major, lived on the coast, genuinely did believe that they were about to be invaded by France at any moment. And that is fascinating to read about. The sense of panic and urgency, the sense of fear that is explored in The Trumpet Major is wonderful and fascinating to read about. And while The Trumpet Major may on the surface and at times feel like a lighter and less deep novel than other Hardy books, it really, really isn't. Like, for the first half of this book, it feels in tone more like Under the Greenwood Tree. It's quite light, it's more about Anne's romantic entanglements, and then towards the end of the book, things get so dark, things get so complicated, things get so dramatic. It's wonderful, I love it. I think it's a brilliantly paced, very, very cleverly written book, which wonderfully explores this time period and the sense of fear, this massive panic that was sweeping Britain at the time. I think that is done really, really wonderfully. I also really like the character of Anne, because in a way she feels a bit more ordinary than a lot of Hardy's other women. She feels more down to earth, I think, than someone, for example, like Bathsheba Everdeen. Not that Bathsheba isn't down to earth and isn't sensible, but in Far From the Man in Crowd, I would say that Hardy goes to great lengths to portray Bathsheba as an extraordinary woman who is different to other women, whereas Anne is presented much more as a kind of ordinary girl. Even if you just look at her name, she is called Anne. When you think about the other Hardy heroines who are called things like Bathsheba, Elfried, Fancy, or Cytherea, she has a very ordinary name, and that suits with her kind of ordinary personality, and that makes her very, very relatable and very interesting to read about. I also think that the 3 male characters are developed really, really well. The Trumpet Major is quite often compared to Far From the Man in Crowd in the fact that he has these 3 different men vying for a woman's affection, and that you can kind of see parallels between the 3 men in The Trumpet Major with the 3 men in Far From the Man in Crowd. So you have John Loveday, who is very stable and constant in the same way to Gabriel Oak in Far From the Man in Crowd, and then you have Bob, who is less steady but more exciting, a bit like Troy in Far From the Man in Crowd, and then we have Festus, who's a bit more like Mr. Baldwood, not necessarily in personality but to a certain extent in instability. And while The Trumpet Major has a very, very different plot to Far From the Man in Crowd, I do think that that the love square in The Trumpet Major is done very, very well, as it is in Far From the Madding Crowd. I think they're both brilliantly done, and the three different characters that are all kind of vying for Anne's affections are very, very well explored. I especially love that Bob and John are brothers, and I really, really love their brotherly relationship. I think it is explored brilliantly in The Trumpet Major. I think Hardy really, really gets their relationship, and it's just done so well and is so thoroughly believable. I find it such an enjoyable and engaging read, and I love the historical context and all that that brings. So, things I like a little bit less about The Trumpet Major, to be honest, there aren't that many. The reason why it's not higher on this list is probably just because there are Hardy novels I love more, and Hardy novels that I feel deal with more themes that I love. It's not that the themes in The Trumpet Major aren't explored brilliantly, it's just that there are other Hardy novels which explore more themes and different themes which I am a little bit more interested in. I also found that the ending of The Trumpet Major, while I could appreciate that it was the right ending for the book, it wasn't the ending I wanted. Certain bits of the ending did feel a little bit abrupt. Nonetheless, I do think it is a brilliant, wonderful, wonderful book, and I would really, really urge you to read it. I think it is such an underrated Thomas Hardy novel, and if you are interested in Jane Austen and her time period, then The Trumpet Major is worth a read because it's set then, but it actually talks about the politics and the war, because as much as I love Jane Austen and as much as I know that she purposefully doesn't talk about the Napoleonic Wars in her books, I kind of wish she did, because it would have been fascinating, and you get all that in The Trumpet Major. Also, if you have read Sylvia's Lovers by Elizabeth Gaskell and really liked that, I would definitely recommend The Trumpet Major, because it deals with a similar time period and very similar themes and worries in terms of the Napoleonic Wars and things like press gangs and the Navy at the time. I would also recommend it if you're looking for a slightly more plot-driven Hardy, because even if the first half of the novel is a little bit quieter, certainly in the second half of The Trumpet Major there is a lot of drama and action. In general, I would just recommend it because I think it's a very underrated Hardy book, and I really, really think it is a brilliant, brilliant read. So thank you very much for watching. Please let me know if you have read The Trumpet Major in the comments down below. That's all I wanted to say on this one, and I'll be back tomorrow talking about another Hardy book.